Joining me in the studio is Conservative MP Michael Fabricant, and with me throughout the programme is Henry Hill, editor of Conservative Home, the independent right-wing blog. Michael, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, I'm sure you probably welcome the addition of Finland, or potential welcome of the potential addition of Finland to NATO. But the problem is, if things do escalate, and if there is some sort of attack on Finland, which would mean NATO would have to respond, looking at the UK armed forces, they're about half the size that they were 30 years ago. Do you think it's time that we upped our defence spending?
Oh, well, I certainly think that. I think there are very few Conservative MPs who wouldn't say that. But, you know, let's just be clear that we actually spend more on defence than the Russians spend on defence. Of course, their buck goes further because the recruits are paid $25 a month. And, of course, you get paid a decent wage because it's a volunteer army here. Also, our equipment works. It's maintained. There isn't corruption. Whereas I know in the Russian army, and I have very, very strong contacts with Russia, in the Russian army, money is siphoned off, goes into generals' pockets, or as they would say, into their pension scheme. And we found that out, didn't we, in their invasion of the Ukraine? I mean, first of all, they thought it was only going to take 4 to 5 days. They had only 4 days of food supplies. They only had 5 to 7 days worth of equipment. Most of the recruits didn't even know they were doing an invasion. 3 SNAT squads were sent in and were in place in Kyiv to try and capture Volodymyr Zelensky. 1 got within 5 minutes of him, but thank God failed. So what they thought was going to be a very quick action failed. By the way, you mentioned Finland, but Sweden too. Very neutral country. Sweden too is going to be joining NATO, and they'll be making their applications. Both have to be ratified, both in Helsinki and the Stockholm parliaments. But it's very exciting. And by the way, can I just say, sorry, I'm monopolising it. But, you know, for me, it's interesting because when I did as I always like to say, a real job before I became a member of parliament, one of the things I did was set up radio and television stations. One of those radio stations was Moscow Echo, which was only closed about 3 weeks ago by Putin. It was the last Moskva Echo, there I'm showing off. Moskva Echo was the last independent radio station and independent voice in Russia. But the great thing is, although the vast majority of the population only get their news from the state broadcasters now, the people who are actually knowing what's going on, they've all got virtual private networks, which have not yet been blocked. They're getting the news. They do know what's going on. And I'm just going to give you a little insight. I was told that the original plan was that Putin was going to announce the mass mobilization of the Russian army at the recent May Day celebrations. He was dissuaded from doing so because they didn't want to provoke NATO. And also it was said, we haven't even got the equipment. So what's the point of mobilizing everybody if they can't even get to the Ukraine?
Now, Henry, talking about not having the equipment, the UK has sent a heck of a lot over to Ukraine, also sent a lot of aid, and there's a cost of living crisis going on at present as well. I mean, how does the government manage these priorities? Is it right that the UK is leading from the front? Yes, it's nice to have that cosy feeling of national pride and that sense of goodwill that it gives us, but there are people out there really struggling at the moment.
I don't think the military aid that we're sending to Ukraine makes an appreciable difference to the cost of living crisis. You know, for better or worse, the arms manufacture is one of the UK's primary export industries, and we're one of the world leaders in making very good weapons. So I think it makes sense that that's our contribution. The much more serious trade-off with the cost of living crisis, of course, is the sanctions regime, this extraordinary international regime of sanctions against Russia, which has thrown an absolute wrench into the world economy, done huge things to gas prices. That's going to be where the real trade-offs are, rather than military aid. I think with response to your first question, there are serious questions about how much the UK could meaningfully contribute on the ground to the defence of Eastern Europe. Our army is simply not geared towards that. We've got the sort of expeditionary force. We invest a lot in the Navy. There's all this idea of exercises east of Suez, the China Sea and everything else. We're not really ready to put a large militarily significant force on the ground in Finland. But I think what we could do is provide them with a lot of logistics and intelligence and, as you say, an awful lot of world-class weapons, put those in the hands of the Finns, and the Finns will probably get the job done.
Worth reminding, by the way, I mean, I agree with all of that, but worth reminding that the British have now a battle group in Estonia, and that's just across the Baltic from Finland.
About
Very close
about
by.
1,000 men, though, isn't it? I mean, if Russia goes in.
Yeah, but we've got the tanks there and all the rest of it.
It's a tripwire rather than a...
Well, it's like, it used to be like in the days of the Second World War, so you're grinning there, you're thinking, oh my God, let them quarrel it out. But you know what? In the Second World War, we had stop lines.
Yeah.
And they were very, very effective. And every single war game that's been played since between the British Army and the German Army said those stop lines would have worked. So actually, if you've got 1,000 men well equipped, it's a little bit like, you know, I said once to an admiral, we're getting 2 huge aircraft carriers. We haven't got the battle groups, the destroyers, to surround them, because every American aircraft carrier is surrounded by about 6 or 8 destroyers. And he said, Mike, it's not like that anymore. The Navy is very, very modern. 2 destroyers does the job of 6 to 8 of the older American destroyers.
Chaps, going to have to leave it there for now. Michael, thank you so much for coming in the studio. Next time, I'm going to get you guys around one of those big sort of strategy maps on a table with bits and bobs and pieces and that device that you push them along and get people into position. Always fabulous having you here, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Henry will be catching up again in a bit.